Anyway, welcome everyone to the first in a new series of virtual roundtables. I'm Hani Mamasani. I'm not Joan Pinnell, contrary to what the name here says. I will correct that later. I'm Hani Mamasani. I'm director of the Northwestern University Transportation Center and a professor of transportation engineering at Northwestern. I'm also a director of a new US DOT center, the Telemobility UTC, which was supported by the US Department of Transportation. And this roundtable today is our first in a series of roundtables that are going to address different aspects of telemobility. Today, we're going to be talking about e-commerce, and we're going to be looking primarily at the e-fulfillment side and the logistics side of e-commerce, as opposed, let's say, to like the consumer behavior side, which will be the subject of another roundtable. We will also be holding in the series roundtables on e-learning, on e-gaming, and telework, of course, and those will be announced in due course. So to address the challenges of e-commerce logistics, we have with us today a really outstanding panel. And so if you talk about e-fulfillment and e-logistics, of course, and e-commerce, who other than UPS and FedEx, of course, are the two big players here that come to mind. All of us have had very good experiences with both companies, and I'm delighted to be welcoming both of them here today with us. So from FedEx, we have Susan Sweat, who is VP for Operations, Planning, and Engineering at FedEx Express. And from UPS, we have Nate Tweer, who is e-commerce and API Strategy Senior Manager. And again, welcome and to both of you, and thank you for being with us today. We also have a Brian Bourke with us, who will be appearing, I think probably experiencing technology issues as well, who is Chief Growth Officer at SEKO Logistics, which in a way recognizes the whole sort of diversity of the e-commerce and e-fulfillment landscape here, and kind of has identified an interesting niche in this in this area, and will be also sharing with us some of his experiences in this realm. And co-moderating this session with me is Professor Sunil Chopra. Professor Chopra is Deputy Dean of the Kellogg School of Management, and he is the IBM Distinguished Professor of Operations Management in the Kellogg School of Management, and he is also, in fact, the previous acting dean also of Kellogg. And I'm particularly pleased to have Professor Chopra with us today, as he has literally written the book on supply chain management and supply chain operations, and has been kind of leading the thinking about omni-channel retailing. And I'm again delighted to have him with us today, and he will be sharing some of the duties with me in terms of interacting with our panelists today. And so the format is going to be mostly conversational, and we're going to start first with a few questions, primarily to our logistics partners here, and e-fulfillment side. And so we're going to start first with with a more general question that we know that e-commerce has been going through the roof. Everybody's been, we've seen surges in in virtually all goods and products that people have been purchasing, and there's no sign of abating at this point. And we know that people are spending more money on home improvement, on goods and products, and less, say, on travel experiences, for instance. So what would you say are the challenges, bottlenecks for e-commerce on the supply chain e-fulfillment side? And it's a big question, and I'm going to direct it first to Nate, if you could maybe address that, and then we'll go to Susan, and then after that to Brian. Hopefully by then he would have joined the session.
Sure. So if we think back to when the lockdown first happened and we started in with the pinch points on different e-commerce things. The first thing that we saw was the pinch point in getting goods out of Asia and into the US, and getting that actually so that it could flow into our supply chain. And so that was one of the first pinch points that we saw. And then we ran into just not enough capacity as users went from, a much lower percentage of their purchases through e-commerce to where we are now. One thing that we're seeing is we see that we're basically 3 years ahead of where we were anticipated to be in e-commerce today. And so if you think about capacity and other constraints that we're running into, that's what we're hitting now because of the large acceleration in growth in e-commerce.
Okay. Susan, you want to take that question?
Well, if these guys are going to have their backgrounds, I'm going to have to go get my green screen so I can put my background up. I feel underrepresented here.
Well, I'm with you. I have my actual background here as well. So,
but no, just to chime in on what Nate said, he's absolutely right. And actually, we estimate that e-commerce has jumped by about 6 years ahead of where it should be or would have been right now had there not been a pandemic. And to his point too about it does start in the beginning, getting the goods in. Commercial line haul has declined from overseas, et cetera. So the capacity to bring in those goods from Asia or Europe has declined significantly. So I think the bottleneck starts with getting the stock, and then the virus specifically has the impact from pick and packing, the shipping constraints, the capacity challenges that Nate mentioned. So I think it all starts in the stock, the initial stock, and it has affected the supply chain through to the final, quite frankly, to the final delivery.
Brian, welcome. We introduced you before you showed up. Did you get the question or should I repeat it?
Yeah, it'd be great to repeat it just to make sure I can answer it as accurately as possible.
Okay, so the question is very general and essentially is where do you see kind of that initial surge that we saw, in e-commerce? How, where do you see it now? Are we, how tight are things, and what has been your experience?
Yeah, it's tight everywhere, I guess. I mean, whether it's as Nate was describing, inbound from Asia, Susan talking about just the parcel. I mean, every single mode is experiencing its own pressures, and they're not always correlated either. I mean, it's not as crazy as it was in May when it was actually faster to ship your cargo from China via ocean than air, which I don't think has ever happened before. But for about a week after the May Day celebrations, it was like that. But it very well could get into that environment again. I mean, this global massive restocking effort that's been occurring right now with record low inventory to sales ratios has created a rush to get product back on the shelves and back in warehouses to fulfill for e-commerce orders. What happened this year was people stopped buying experiences and they started buying more things. And all of those things needed to be shipped, and they will still need to be shipped for a while. Our city here in Chicago just issued another stay-at-home order today. And so we do expect that the surge in e-commerce demand will only continue, which puts all of the other pressures around everything else that has happened this year. The patterns will hold, especially with the arrival of a potential vaccine here very soon, which will put additional capacity constraints around almost every mode that's out there.
So, Sunil, do you care to follow up on this question at this point, or should I follow up on it and then kind of bring you back for some more comments on this?
You go ahead. I'll jump in as, I think they've really laid the groundwork for now, where it seems that the constraint that is being felt to the greatest extent is the input constraint. My guess is over the next 6 weeks that will show up further down the supply chain on the last mile delivery end.
So, okay, so following up on that first question, of course, there was this huge surge when with the first lockdown orders, and from a customer perspective, it was clear that the system was strained and clogged because delivery times, you were lucky to get things in weeks instead of same day. So people's expectations shifted to accept longer delivery times and so on. But today, even though e-commerce volumes are still very high, it appears that you guys have really fully adjusted to this, and you're dealing with that excess demand compared to sort of historical norms in a very, maybe it's tight behind the scenes, but as customers, we're not seeing that anymore. We're seeing, seamless kind of delivery and so on. So is it because there's been sort of maybe more investment in equipment and drivers? Has it been better optimization of services, a combination of the above, or just one big surge that kind of has worked its way through to where now it's at levels that your networks can deal with?
I'll jump in on that, Hani.
Yeah.
I think it's a combination of all of those things. And to your point, customers have been extremely generous with their patience as all of the delivery companies adjust to the new norm. But I will tell you that we're running levels that are similar to our traditionally busiest times of the year. And we've been able to do that through capacity expansion and optimization, which you mentioned both, because as Nate knows, and density wins. So as we get these additional residential stops in, we are able to take advantage of more of optimizing of those routes. However, I will say that I think most organizations have added some temporary capacity, whether that be vehicles or temp employees or whatever equipment that they needed, because running at this capacity is very expensive. It's an expensive proposition for organizations. So yes, we have a lot of freight and all of the organizations have a lot of freight, but it's an expensive proposition. So I think as Professor Chopra said, as we come out of this, whenever that may be, maybe the fourth quarter or for us, but the second quarter of 2021, third quarter, I think we're all going to need to readjust what our current expectations on running our system is at. That's just from my perspective.
Yeah, I agree. And we've been running at, basically, like she said, peak volume levels for months. And that basically has never happened like that before. And so you're looking at, which for the business, obviously, it's great having the demand. Operationally, we've had to make adjustments. We have made investments into automation that has helped, some of the sort and middle mile pieces. But especially when you're getting down to the final mile, you have to make those stops at every house. And even if your route density may improve, your actual stop density may not improve as quickly. And so we have, had to, similar to them, operate in some ways like it is peak and bring on temporary capacity through, rentals, similar to what Susan said. I think in a lot of ways we've reacted. It sounds like in a similar way as we see the demand, we have to meet that demand because it's a great business opportunity, but it is more expensive to handle. And in areas where we can, run it through like the automated buildings and get it through more efficiently, obviously that's been better for us as we're running more through our, fixed assets. But as we get all the way to that final mile, it still has to get to that doorstep. And as e-commerce grows, you still have to make those deliveries. And so to meet that challenge, we've had to, hire more temporaries and do other things like that we've really never done outside of the November, December peak.
Mm-hmm. And are you able to find the temporaries that can do the job?
So we have, we have been able to meet the need. It is a little bit sad that the recession that was brought on, it's not that just that the economy is doing amazing. There's also the recession that was brought on by the which has made more of the labor force available to be hired. But it is I think during the peak season especially, it's still going to be extremely tight.
Brian, what's your take?
Yeah, I think it's like when you go running, right? When that first mile is always the worst, because you're getting, your body's adjusting to the fact that now you're running, and it's not an enjoyable experience, at least not for me. But usually, if you get past that first mile, then your body begins to really catch up and get used to it. So it was that initial shock kind of in April to May of that surge in volume that was beyond any buffer or standard deviation that was realistically possible at that time during the year. And then it didn't go down. It just we knew more about what was coming. We could understand the volumes and the flows and better plan around those. And that does require additional trucks, additional warehouse space, signing leases on Sundays just to make sure we have the space in order to perform the logistics duties that we need to do, and ultimately labor. That was and that continues to be a challenge in some markets in particular that are more known for warehouses and warehousing because there is such a demand that's kind of more hyper local in certain parts of the country, whether that be Southern California, Central Indiana. I'm sure a few other markets where that it's a lot of sheds that have popped up, especially recently, and there's only a certain amount of labor in those areas. But for the most part, it has been relatively easy to find the people that we need. For example, here in Chicago, as an example. So it just for the most part, it's been okay. But there's been a few areas that are kind of just very unique due to the clustering of a lot of logistics activities that occur.
Honey,
So,
may I ask a follow-up question here?
Please.
To what extent are each of you seeing the current surge in e-commerce demand coming from, the traditional big players versus small players who are, when I say, small retailers, so just in terms of that mix, is that the way it has always been, or are you seeing something a little different this time?
We're seeing a lot of differences where, these so-called digitally native direct-to-consumer brands they're exploding. I mean, they are just absolutely leveraging the growth across multiple channels. They could be selling on marketplaces, they could be selling through traditional retail channels, but their own website and the marketing that they're doing now to really accelerate their growth and all the benefits that come along with building brand equity, building customer acquisition and lifetime customer value. The direct-to-consumer brands, especially the digitally native ones, they've been I think the real winners. But I don't discount the legacy retailers either, because there have been a number of them that have been able to leverage their physical infrastructure and footprint to offer up buy online, pick up in store as an example, in addition to increased e-commerce orders where they are, it provides more options in the buying experience. And so maybe you do want to go to the store and stop in and see if you can pick something else up, wear a mask and all those things, but maybe you just want to have it delivered to your home. And that flexibility is not something a lot of DTC brands can offer. Although I have to say, it's been interesting how, the retail landscape, was evolving before COVID. Now it's just, as we said, we're seeing the future now, like we've jumped a few years into the future, and you still see some retailers and some direct-to-consumer brands expanding their retail footprint, which is incredible. So, we don't think retail is dying at all. What's happening is I think bad retail is dying quicker, and the more dynamic, innovative, brands and retailers out there, they're really coming into their own, and they're helping to redefine what is retail, what is safe retail, what is good retail. All of that is changing in real time, and it's been very disruptive in the retail sector. I think we can all attest to that just by, looking at the news and going down to the mall or to our main street or downtown areas. But that's been incredible to kind of see that dynamic between those two audiences.
I'd like to just make one comment. If I can, if any of our participants would like to ask questions, please use the Q&A feature. We will have an open Q&A at the end, so please feed your questions through that, and we'll be monitoring that channel and then take your questions at the end. Thank you. Susan, you want to pick up on Sunil's question?
Yeah, just from a different perspective, I think what we've seen is much of what Brian said, but just from a little bit different twist. What we've seen is the small business owner, the small organization, they've had to change very quickly in light of what's been going on. People not able to get out, stay-at-home orders. They have no option but to if they're going to continue shipping their product or have their product out, they have to ship it. So what we've seen there is a growth in viable small businesses that they've jumped feet first into the deep end, probably accelerated what their longer-term plan was in a very short time frame. So we've seen that, and to Brian's point, I mean, some of the bigger e-tailers, they're just doing it better.
Yeah, and I would also just add that the barrier to selling online is just so low now that it is easier for them to get online through whether it's Shopify or Magento or some of those other shopping cart platforms, making it so simple to just one day turn on your business and then get your inventory uploaded. You could be selling on your own site, extremely quickly. So that's one thing that we have noticed is growth through those platforms because of the small businesses needing a way to get their goods out the door, and that new capability being, I wouldn't say new, but that capability being so easy to access and put online. So we have seen definitely growth through that channel. And Brian talked a little bit about the pickup in store. I mean, that's obviously been a huge trend that we've seen more than maybe anticipated. I always used to, say pickup in store is kind of just a waste, like what, and that was just kind of my internal feeling. But obviously we've seen consumers move toward that pickup in store.
So this is perfect segue here, because next, I'm going to ask Professor Chopra to give us kind of to set the stage for us, a little overview of how he is seeing developments in e-commerce, again, particularly with the pickup in store versus different forms of online versus physical. So Sunil, floor is yours. Would you like to share your screen? You have slides?
Sure. I'll just have one, as a professor, I can't resist putting up a slide. So the other panelists, hopefully, my apologies to you, but I really will want to come back to two very important points raised by Susan, Brian, and Nate. I think one, this notion of pickup and other formats growing, but in some sense, this small retailers becoming a more significant part of the portfolio that you're delivering at the last mile, and especially facilitated by platforms like Shopify. So I'll just share one simple slide in this case to just, give us a framework of how we might think about these channels evolving. And, an example to keep in mind, I think would be, so if I think of companies that have done well, the new name which has started to pop up is Target. And it is in that context, I thought I'd sort of set this up. Target was a traditional retailer with significant presence. And the way I tried to characterize the different channels was how information is exchanged and how product is exchanged. So, as customers, we would walk into our Target. So information was exchanged face to face and usually leave with the product that we purchased, right? And I just want to bring up one channel that was recently announced, the relationship between Target and the beauty product Ulta. So now Target's going to have Ulta stores inside Target. And if we think of what role an Ulta store could play is, now the presence in Target is doing two things. It is, of course, bringing Ulta product into Target. So that's traditional retail, but Target could have done that without carrying an Ulta store. But what an Ulta store's presence does is it provides Ulta with a showroom. So Target now begins to work a little bit like a showroom for Ulta products, some of which might be present at Target and some of which may not be present at Target. So in some sense, you already see Best Buy do that a little bit. So physical retailers can think of, and Target Ulta relationship is a good one to consider, where the store gets used as both containing inventory that the customer can walk away with, but also inventory that is primarily serving the role of a showroom where a customer can try, look, but now through a salesperson have access to a lot of variety that might not be present at the store. It is simply present in some DC somewhere. Now comes, how do you access those products? Those products could be accessed by the pickup at store option, or they could be shipped directly to people's homes. So when I think now of omnichannel developing, these four channels can sort of go side by side. And if I were to make a statement about what has happened during COVID, I think some of the brick and mortar players have realized, both Walmart and Target, just to use two examples, have realized the value of their brick and mortar presence, because the brick and mortar presence now begins to serve not just as a location where product to be purchased is stocked, it serves as a showroom for product that may not be present at the store, but it gives the customer a chance to maybe try a shirt, but there may be colors that are not available at the store, which the customer can easily order. I'm just using that as an example. Or beauty supplies. There might be some supplies available at the store, but others which are only shipped from a central location. And both Target and Walmart have clearly exploited the pickup option to a much greater extent. And in some sense, they have a natural advantage because, many of us might be going to a Target or a Walmart to do other shopping. So the marginal cost of a pickup is much smaller. It was in this context, given this setup, that is where I was thinking of the small players and the big players, because some of the big retailers, I think the brick and mortar retailers have exploited these three channels, which take advantage of their physical presence to a greater extent than they did in the past. Whereas the small players just do not have that option. They have to rely on a third party, like, the three people, the companies represented on our panel, to service them. So it was in this context I was asking you, in some sense, you provide a service to the small players which is much greater than the service that you are providing, relatively speaking, to the big players. And it was for that reason that I was asking you the question of the small players versus the big players. So with this basic, just sort of a landscape to think about, I'll stop sharing. It's already more than Hani, did you want to follow up with some questions, or should I start?
Please go ahead. Go ahead with your questions.
So my, there's kind of two things, especially from the big guys, which we are seeing. From the people with the brick and mortar, this notion of trying to take advantage of the brick and mortar to a greater extent, for example, through store pickup. And to some extent, that means that they will have a slightly lower need for last mile delivery. And then if I look at, just to take an example, the Amazons of the world, which are doing last mile, Amazon in particular has started to bring in-house a bigger chunk of the middle mile. I'm just kind of, do you see, and I would love to see, do you see this as, oh, this is great because we are already so constrained, and so we're going to think in terms of focusing on our business on all these little guys who are going online that we can add value to? Or do you see this as a competitive challenge? So I know I've said too much, but given everything that I've said, do you see this as an opportunity, a challenge, and sort of what, if any, plans do you have?
Brian, do you want to start?
Sure, I guess I'll be a more neutral answer there, right? Because of, yeah, it's an interesting topic, I'm sure. And, for us, I guess it's, I don't know if you guys read the book, Who Moved My Cheese, right? In our world, we just see the pie getting so much bigger, and even if, there's some insourcing going on, they're not the only ones. Walmart's like the biggest trucking company in the country, I believe, right? You have Peloton that have their own delivery drivers, delivery vehicles. I think it's a natural evolution of, as e-commerce, when it used to just be 5% of total retail sales, it was an exception. Now it's, for a lot of brands, it's like their only channel or their largest channel. And so, I think it's a natural evolution that you start to see more and more of this insourcing of the actual logistics or supply chain, or at least pieces of it, portions of it, because no one company, Amazon included, can do it all. It's just impossible. So I think it's kind of a natural evolution that there are some efficiencies to be gained with economies of scale, but there's that pie keeps getting bigger, and we're all growing still, right? Every company on here, due to this expansion of e-commerce. So with some puts and takes here and there, of course, it has been a challenging year. Don't get me wrong, but yeah, I think that I think you'll see more of that from other players, from other companies, local delivery. But there's also, as you mentioned, we're doing an outsized portion of the outsourced logistics for a lot of these smaller companies. And so as e-commerce goes up, who they work with, who they partner with becomes more important. So we play actually a more and more prominent and important role than we did before, even if there are these other players out there that are kind of insourcing and investing in their own infrastructure. So for us, it's kind of all opportunity without being, I guess, blind to the realities of, what the situation presents itself. But, I think there's more upside across the board for the entire industry, more than anything. Just again, look at Walmart 10, 20 years ago. They didn't take over the 3PL or trucking space. They served a need, and Amazon's just maybe taking it to another level, but they're not the only ones. Like I mentioned, Peloton, there's a few others. So I think that's how we kind of look at it, as really just an evolution of, when something's 40% of retail sales, when it was 2%, things like this are going to happen, and that's natural.
Yeah, and I would say from our point of view, one thing that we've found is for these smaller businesses that you've talked about, we've found ways to synergize. So if you think back to maybe the early days, there wasn't necessarily a solution that would take your inventory and list it across multiple marketplaces and do things like that. And what we've found is we can go to these small businesses and say, hey, we'll help you with a technology solution and a fulfillment solution and a delivery solution. And that way we can help you across your full supply chain. Whereas maybe even like 5 years ago, we weren't necessarily targeting that full value chain. And for other larger businesses, they are able to handle some of those pieces by themselves. And so for us, we view that as a place where we can bring value across the full value chain, as opposed to being more in the delivery side of things, specifically for some of those larger players. So we've kind of more narrowly focused recently on finding the best ways to serve those small, medium businesses so that we can have the right solutions to meet those needs. And then I think on the point about the in-store happening, yeah, like we're seeing that as well. And it still is more transactions on the website, more transactions leading to more ships. I think Brian is pointing that out, and I think you did a great job. So one of the facts that we've talked about on buy online, pick up in store is that about 43% of the people did it for the first time because of the pandemic. And so those people are going to go back to pick up in store, and if they had a good experience, they're also still going to get packages shipped to their homes. And the more things that they're buying online, the more transactions that are coming out and the more revenue growth. The story we always tell is, when historically we would ship one commercial package into, say, a Macy's or a Target, and they would sell 40 shirts out of that commercial package. And now those are 40 shirts going to the individual home. And so we see that growth as things move to e-commerce, and it's a big growth engine for us, obviously. And it's coming from both the small and the large. I guess just to recap though, we feel like we can build the most value for those small players, and we've done that. And I think that's been a great area for us since we've focused so intently on narrowly feeding those needs of small, medium businesses.
Thank you. Susan?
Well, the guys covered it really well. I'll just add a couple of things. Target and Ulta aren't the first ones to do that. Actually, it was JCPenney's and Sephora who had a very similar model with the cosmetics and the regular brick and mortar shopping. So, but just one more thing to add on to what Nate said, because I think he hit the nail on the head, is that specifically small business shippers are looking for a partner in their total value proposition, whether that be, order management, fulfillment, shipping, tracking and visibility, returns. Returns is a huge part of the business now. So whoever, and there's enough work for everybody, as Brian said, but whoever does that best is going to have, I think, the advantage with that small and medium customer because they have more needs that they would rather outsource than build their own internal systems.
Can I just ask one quick follow-up question? And this is directed to Brian, because you have a somewhat different niche, of course, with with the delivery side that you have. Are you impacted in the same way by the sort of pickup in store, or the fact that, for example, to the return side of things, both with UPS and FedEx, there are physical locations where people can go to and drop off their packages and so on. Does that aspect at all come into your type of operation, Brian?
Absolutely. We've delivered and installed more parcel lockers to retail locations in the past 6 months than we have in the history of our company. So, we play in different areas of the supply chain, and it's not like we can keep delivering the same parcel locker to the same place, but the evolution of retail and delivery experiences has multiple different facets to it. And we could be also delivering merchandise as our colleagues here on this panel also do. They're delivering merchandise as well, cartons of goods to retail locations. So it's all about velocity and movement of items, and they get delivered to a parcel locker. That's great. What I do think is important to realize, though, is that we're not going back to the way it was. That even with the arrival of hopefully not just one but multiple vaccines that can hopefully get to all of us by, let's say, the spring of next year or early summer. What we saw in China, because we have operations like Susan and Nate in China, where we kind of first saw the COVID warning signs earlier this year. But with the SARS outbreak, e-commerce penetration, it didn't go back. Like Nate mentioned the behaviors. I mean, once you do it, you get into the habit now. They're no longer, these are habits. We've been doing this now for 6 months or more, and we like it. We enjoy it. We enjoy having the option of getting items delivered to the trunk of our car or garage or to a parcel locker, and these are all great things. And so you look at China, like things like cosmetics. e-commerce penetration is upwards of 70-80%. And that a lot of that happened because of the previous outbreaks they had to deal with. So retail was really transformed. It didn't go back. And so, like with the parcel lockers we're delivering, we don't see them going away. It's just the parcel locker technology will get better. And there's a lot of interesting, I think, innovations in the entire delivery experience and what we call demand chain. So we used to talk about supply chains. We're talking more about demand chains because it all starts with the delivery options to the consumer, having the power and flexibility in their hands, and they can really call the shots. And that's really what, this is the year of the consumer. The retailer and the direct-to-consumer brand and the marketplace, they're all now players where the consumer is ultimately the boss. And that's led to a lot of that innovation that we see today.
Thank you, Brian. Sunil, you want to continue with your line of questioning?
Sure, I'm happy to. So I guess, maybe I'll just first pick up on that, the value you're bringing to the small consumer. So retailer. So given this focus, do you see yourself putting in more sort of warehousing and other sort of needs that the small guys have? And, so do you have plans with regards to investment in that regard? And related to that, do you see either you yourself having a platform like Shopify or partnering with the platform like Shopify to sort of provide this end-to-end from an online store to complete fulfillment?
So I can talk to that. So at UPS, we launched an on-demand warehousing company called Where to Go. We launched it basically from scratch last year, where we're going out and we're building up the on-demand warehousing space for B2B transactions and for small, medium businesses to use it, where it's completely asset light. So we're using inventory space that's already out there and enabling small businesses to access that and distribute inventory across the country so that they can get the goods closer to the consumer. On the B2C side, we did a similar thing with a new product that we launched called e-fulfillment, where a similar thing where to simplify it, we said, okay, we're going to put a warehouse in Inland Empire, Southern California. We're going to put one in Louisville near our key operations. You can get almost 100% of the country with 2-day delivery. And we've made it simple so that you don't have to manage it across 15 different warehouses and manage that yourself. We made it, let's do 2. We'll get you as close as you can and simplify processes for them. So as far as fulfillment, we've definitely invested into that space. That Where to Go platform is, we're going to expand that platform. And as those capabilities are more available and we're distributed into more warehouses and there's more demand, I think that's a dual-sided platform that will continue to grow. As far as working with other e-commerce platforms, we, on our last earnings call, talked a little bit about the digital access program that we have. I don't know if, inside UPS, that's probably bigger as far as like just something that we would mention on an earnings call, but we're working with the platforms like Shopify so that we can help them, help their customers. And so we have, as a part of the digital access program, tried to go out and work with those platforms because that's where the customers are. I think we've always talked about, there's a UPS salesperson that could be pretty much anywhere within 10 minutes. But in a lot of cases, it's a better experience if it's done digitally and done through a platform. And so we've been trying to think through, okay, well, customer journeys are changing, customer experience is changing. How can we be in the right place at the right time? And so working or partnering with some of those platforms is an ideal approach to access those customers and make it so that we can, find a mutually beneficial solution to go along with some of those capabilities that I talked about at the start in fulfillment. So that's how we're thinking about it. Is platforms are important, platforms are growing. We need to be in the right place to be able to grow with it.
Susan, care to comment?
Well, I could almost totally duplicate what Nate just said. We too have a inventory. It's called Critical Inventory Logistics Group. and their role is to do exactly what Nate said, is to get the warehousing and or the product closer to the distributors. But one thing I would add too is the need for specialized warehousing beyond, what I see down the street here, but whether that be cold chain or some other type of specialty that a lot of organizations don't want to or don't feel like, especially in smaller uh, businesses, that they can afford at this point. So we're able to offer those type of alternatives for our customers. And I think Nate said it all. We're in the same business, and we're
I,
doing.
yeah, I've definitely agreed with a lot of what you have said so far. And I think it's good to kind of confirm. I think in a lot of ways the market is growing, and we're like, to meet those new needs that are coming out, we have to invest in those capabilities. And I think touching on that cold chain piece, that's obviously important as healthcare grows. And there's also going to be in-home healthcare and other things that could be coming down the line that may not necessarily be as big today, that could grow because of things like coronavirus, but also the ability to get goods to the home through a cold chain supply chain is similar to what Susan had talked about.
Ryan, any thoughts?
Yeah, no, it's all about an ecosystem right now, and we're long on Shopify for sure. I mean, they are really going to transform e-commerce more so than they already have, and I think a lot of brands, especially direct-to-consumer brands, a lot of them got shut down on these marketplaces because they weren't considered essential. So a lot of them had to reassess what risk management meant to them, controlling their own destiny, and realizing that they need to set up their own operations, still outsourced, but at least not tied to one channel. And that diversification strategy has led for opportunities for all of us, and the ability to be integrated and the ability to integrate easily with platforms like Shopify, but also ShipStation and EasyShip. And I mean, it's all about being a part of an ecosystem that is growing, becoming more diverse. Obviously, with some herding going on with some best-in-class solutions out there. There's Magento, there's Demandware, there's WooCommerce, and all of them are becoming increasingly important. That we need to be able to connect with these systems. If we want to get really technical, it used to be EDI was kind of the standard since before I was born, and it's still used today as the majority of integrations between shippers and carriers. Those connections. The reason why it's been used for so long is it works so well. The problem with it is it does not move at the speed of e-commerce, and that's where API integrations have really overtaken, I think, importance. And this year has only accelerated that to the point where, with API integrations, you can more scalably and seamlessly and without friction integrate with a lot of these platforms, which are really essential to be able to move at the speed of e-commerce, which is incredibly fast.
Thank you. Sunil?
So do you mind if I just change direction a little bit?
The floor is yours.
So this is in some sense, again, in going back to COVID, and I have read and seen so many articles, which started, of course, with Manhattan and New York City, about people leaving the city. You spoke about the importance of density. So I guess my first question was, in your last mile deliveries, did you actually see that change where deliveries to maybe the densest parts of the country diminished and deliveries to the slightly dense part increased? Did you actually see that change? And maybe I'll put the follow-up, and looking forward, if that change, which some people talk about, would you see that as an opportunity or a challenge?
Well, I can start because I live in a densely populated area myself, and I can tell that Susan and Nate's routes on my street are very optimal for them because we have quite a few people in our building. So that's the type of deliveries that they like to see. I think they're probably going to care more about when do they get to those B2B packages back and delivering to office buildings. I mean, it's that type of mix that they spoke about earlier that's really, all of these platforms were built for. And I think we're going to return to that by let's say summer next year. We're going to have kind of, maybe more work from home flexibility for office workers, but people are going to come back to the office. And I think people are going to come back to the cities themselves, although not maybe the levels to which they were before. I mean, you look at rents in New York and San Francisco, they're plummeting right now. Although we're starting to see already rents in New York creeping upwards now because, as with anything market driven, once the prices get low enough, a lot of people see opportunity there too. So, it's going to be like, a tub in an earthquake, right? The water's going to slosh around a bit, but, it won't be for any long-term period of time that I think is going to impact CapEx investments in infrastructure. I think there's going to be some shifts. I just don't see it. We don't have near the volumes that Susan and Nate have, so they may have privy to some of these numbers better than we do. We don't see these big shifts, but even if there were shifts, I think it's going to, the bathtub water is going to settle again, hopefully before the summer of next year.
Susan, Nate?
So, I would have to go in and run something. I would have, looked that up. I don't know. I don't want to speak to it because I don't know the actual, but I will say, like, for us, when we think about density, there is kind of, like, we would hope that it's not people moving to rural Montana, if that's what would have been happening, So I don't think, and maybe I just need to read 5 more New York is back articles before I realize that New York is really back. But I think it is, I do think that people will continue. I like the analogy of moving back and like the bathtub swashing back and forth, where I think it will normalize back to being similar to how it was before. And for us, like I said, I would have had to have looked up to see if there was an adjustment from maybe our urban to suburban or rural. And I don't have those numbers off the top of my head. But overall, I think we are interested in, if we can have, dense deliveries, I think that's more ideal for us. Also, I think, the more packages per stop, I think more ideal for us. Like the more density that e-commerce can bring, the better.
Yeah, I was going to say too, because if there is a shift and all of a sudden a higher percentage of our population are going to be living in the middle of nowhere in Montana, and not the middle of nowhere, I'm sorry, it's beautiful there actually. But you know what I mean. If the population of the United States becomes less decentralized, the cost associated with those deliveries, which Nate, I think you were getting to, they start to skyrocket significantly because density provides a lot of benefits for everybody. And I think retailers and brands especially are still figuring out what does it mean to offer nationwide shipping and 2-day shipping, and I think consumers in like let's say the New York, 5 boroughs in New York, they have different expectations versus if you're a consumer in Butte, Montana. But you still have to be able to serve those consumers in some capacity. And if we see like this long-term shift, I can see certain metros like Austin, Texas, and Chattanooga. These areas are certainly going to continue to accelerate their growth. And maybe that's what's going to happen. Like these large metro areas will just grow slower. And these mid-sized cities are going to be the ones that are going to see a huge surge, but still focused around density. I just think there's still the benefit of being close to things and attractions and business and work, and nobody wants to spend 2 hours in a car. And I think, work from home, there's going to be some permanent shift, but I think for the most part, there's going to be, an incentive for everybody to be around each other again once we get past the worst of this pandemic.
So Susan, are you picking up any escape from the city?
Well, all I can say is that if they're going to beautiful Montana, they need to take 10,000 of their closest friends with them, and they all need to shop. So we want to have them all there.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Density wins.
Yeah.
But like Nate said, I haven't looked at the longer term trends or the latest trends, but I know that in New York and Chicago and LA and San Francisco and Dallas and Houston, all of those cities, they're thriving right now as far as our business goes. They are thriving. And, you know, density wins, and we like I said, if we start seeing a lot of activity in those rural areas, I hope they have a lot of friends and family that come with them so that we can
Yeah.
In fact, Sunil, I'll turn the question around in this case, because I think the fact that you cannot get things delivered very quickly might be a factor on whether you want to relocate. I'll give an anecdotal personal experience. Recently, I was in Upper Michigan for a few days and realized I forgot to bring something with me. And I go to Amazon and I'm like ordering, and as I'm ordering it, it's like same day delivery. And I'm like excited. As soon as I actually put in the real address, so it was seeing my Chicago address first, where same day. And then as soon as it saw the actual address, 2 days.
Yeah.
So it's like, what? Who wants to live in a place where you can't get things the same day or the next day, right?
Okay, spoken like a true person in Chicago.
Exactly. I was going to say, the Yoopers don't want you.
So this is probably a good time to go into some of the questions that we have received from our audience. And I'm going to start actually with one that I was about to ask myself, and it's a question by Mayor Crush, asking about thoughts about micro-fulfillment and fulfillment automation. I was going to ask about the automation part of it, because certainly with a lot of the issues that you had discussed and integrating sort of the fulfillment with delivery and so on, automation can play a role. Can you comment on that? I know Susan, FedEx has been looking at that. Certainly UPS has also been investing into automation. Is there anything you could share with us at this point?
Well, and Nate said it earlier, and I hate to repeat what he said since it was good, but I will. That's how we drive down cost, is using sweating those assets to the max capability, and the automation is part of that. And I will say too, though, that and Brian mentioned the ecosphere that we need to be operating in. That's part of what we bring to these smaller customers is automation opportunities, whether that be through AI or whatever that case may be. As a business partner with them, we are also bringing them automation and technology innovation, as well as internally in our own business.
Yeah, and for us, a lot of our automation has been focused on the hub facilities, where we're trying to get throughput as high as possible, and generally we have standard conveyable packages coming through that are already packaged. In that e-fulfillment product that I talked about, I think we are constantly evaluating, does it make sense to automate, or are we continuing to maybe do a more manual fulfillment just based on the size and scale? So it's not necessarily an immediate decision, but it's something we're constantly evaluating. How many of our hubs are we going to retrofit? How many are we going to move to a new automated operating model? How many do we just leave as they are and focus someplace else? It's a big, it's obviously a huge decision, because you're looking at a large CapEx investment in any of those automation capabilities compared to how much throughput you'll get because of the automation. And in the end, I think we're just kind of taking a strategic working on automation, especially in some of our larger hubs and newer hubs. And then once we have, better data on all those areas, we will decide exactly how far we go on maybe retrofitting or automating some of the facilities we've had in place for a longer time.
Hani, can I add something to that? I mean, we're all fishing in the same pond when it comes to resources, and specifically people. And the hubs, Nate brought it up, are a prime example. the work that's done in our hubs, both UPS and FedEx, are the same work that's done at these big e-commerce fulfillment centers. Some of the e-tailers that we're talking about, we're all fishing in that same pond. At some point, and sooner than later, all of us are going to have to continue to take our automation levels up and increase, just because the people power that we need, the human capital, is not going to be as readily available. It's not going to be able to fulfill the need.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so if you think about co-location, that also happens at near, Worldport in Louisville, or I'm assuming similar things are happening in Memphis, where large retailers are locating near our facilities. We're also looking for the same people with similar skill sets. And so that's a really good point, Susan.
So, Hani, if I may just follow up on that, it's clear that you're talking about automation in kind of your hub facilities. The students always ask me about this, and I always pour cold water. Do you see, or do you see any need, investment for automation in the last mile?
No.
So I will say that there are specific use cases, and so we've rolled out some things with a facility, one of the large hospitals in North Carolina, where we have drone flights from building to building, where we're dropping off pharmaceuticals or other things that need to get there immediately. So very true that I don't necessarily need a drone dropping something off in my backyard over here. But as far as automation in a specific or targeted way in a controlled environment like a hospital campus, I think that's a place where there is value. And who knows, maybe there will be something that we talked a little bit about Montana, but I'm from Utah, and it's pretty rural as well out there. And so if you think maybe there is a different way of getting packages out to those more rural areas. But I think when Brian was talking about his street and living in an apartment complex, there's no use for it there. It's just going to be a much less efficient way of getting that delivery done. So, yeah, I was on one of the teams at the start when we were first evaluating like drone delivery, and I was like, this is going to be amazing. We need to like do this. And then you start looking deeper and deeper, and it's like, well, the thing can only carry 10 pounds. And so it's like, how are you going to get it all the way across to this area? So it's a very targeted area where something like that would need to happen. And it would need to be extremely high values, where the time is so much more important than anything else, where maybe you're flying above traffic because you need to get something to that hospital because they need to do a surgery, as opposed to, I need to get something to a suburban household where that big package car could get there just as quickly and make that delivery in a lot of ways safer and more cost effective.
I actually did receive a second follow-up question to that, which I think echoes the question that Professor Chopra asked from Jane Lin at the University of Illinois at Chicago. It's like she would like to hear thoughts from the panelists on adopting autonomous trucks for delivery. And I think that's exactly what we're addressing here as well. Susan, you care to add anything?
Sure. So autonomous vehicles go beyond just the last mile delivery or movement from point A to point B. We actually have some autonomous tugs on our ramps, and I'm sure Nate does too in Louisville, at the hubs, where we're using them to, pull the ULDs off of airplanes and move them from point A to point B in the sorting facilities. So there is a place for autonomous vehicles, but much like Nate said with the drones, it's a targeted area right now with the technology being where it is. And of course, as anything, as technology continues to grow and becomes more reliable, then I think there will be more opportunities in that area. But it's a process, and right now we're taking those autonomous vehicles, so to speak, and using them in places that are not in the general public at this point. So
Yeah.
Nate, I don't know if you want to add to that.
I think the thing that I would add is, when there is like a safety feature, like maybe, like helping with autonomous braking or something like that, that's probably something that we would be more likely to evaluate earlier, as opposed to, the level 5 autonomy where it can go full like hub to hub travel on the freeway. And I think one of the underrated or things that is maybe not talked about as much is, is there going to be a common regulation structure that enables that? So maybe we could do it in Arizona if we got approval to go from Tucson to Phoenix or whatever else. But then how do we do it from crossing into California or crossing into Utah or New Mexico from Arizona? And then how do we create the right regulations so that it's still safe and, happening in the right way? So I think it's, even if the technology were to get there today, and maybe there is some company that has the technology that could do it today, it's getting the regulations done correctly and making sure that you have the ability to handle things all the way through from hub to hub, because really until you're going all the way on like a longer haul like that, it's we'd be looking more at like safety type features like braking or other things like that.
Well, and Nate, can I add something to that? I think that's a good point, because if you look at the drone technology, it's advanced way beyond the regulations.
Yes.
And so I think you're exactly on point when you say what we would see that with the autonomous on-road, general public on-road vehicles. The regulations have not caught up because the technology has gone faster than I think was originally thought.
Yeah, and you look at maybe Waymo or one of those companies where they've done millions of miles, but it's how do you transition that to a full feeder truck or a full tractor trailer and truly be comfortable that that's going to be safe? I just, the regulations just need to be in the right place to go along with the technology to be able to fully do that. And when you're talking about final mile, though, you still need to get it to the home. I don't know if we're not gonna, I don't imagine like catapults or something like that out of the cars. So I mean, you still need to be able to get
No, we could have somebody sitting inside with the catapult, right?
Yeah,
So
yes,
he's
yes.
not driving, he's only doing the catapult.
A slingshot would be
One
nice.
question, just going back to the density issues, the delivery to lower density areas that Sunil had brought up earlier. We have a question from Krishnan Viswanathan asking if he's curious to know if to overcome these density issues and make shipping costs manageable, whether the industry's been thinking about leveraging some of the dead malls that seem to litter small, mid-sized towns as a central last mile DC, so that people can drive to these malls to pick up their goods. Brian, you want to kick that one off?
Yeah, this is big topic, in our world. And I think that, if you look at the value of a mall, you look at, I don't know, Woodfield Mall, Schaumburg, right? The value of the mall is X. And then if you look at the value of a mall, if you convert it into a fulfillment center, it's like 10% of X.
Yep.
So that in and of itself is almost like a non-starter for most mall property owners to go into that kind of conversion. It makes sense, like if you just think about the fact that there's so much empty space and we need empty space, but if you actually look at the valuation and the logistics, quote unquote, of the operation of the conversion, a lot of those assumptions kind of break down. We're seeing more interest in just really more densely populated centers. For if you look at New York, places like the Bronx, we're looking at. If you look at Chicago, we could have opened up a facility in Aurora, but we actually selected Elk Grove because it's closer to the population. We pay more per square foot, but there's value in that for us to be able to deliver quicker to customers and still be able to access logistics infrastructure like O'Hare Airport. So those types of equations are leading us to kind of get closer and closer to where people live as really the number one driver. And that could mean, an old converted warehouse that's now been upgraded to a more efficient automated warehouse or electric, et cetera, rather than looking at, a mall. And I think, especially in Chicago, we've seen more successful conversions of malls into either entertainment complexes or office, environments or office campuses. I think those are probably going to be the more likely scenarios. Although I agree, I was one of them that was thinking, oh, this is perfect, right? Like nobody wants to go to the mall and they're closing stores. So it wouldn't be great to leverage that infrastructure to create fulfillment capacity for e-commerce. And I just don't see that really happening. There will be exceptions, I think some notable ones perhaps, but there's too many other, I think, good buildings or good opportunities to, for example, infill in cities. It's a great infill opportunity because when you kind of have urban core areas that where redevelopment's happening, you're going to get so many more incentives from cities across the country to get these fulfillment centers in metro urban areas, and all of the tax incentives that go along with that. I think that you're going to see more of that infill opportunities in big urban centers rather than mall conversions for micro fulfillment or smaller fulfillment centers.
Yeah, and one point on top of that is when we talk about e-commerce, we always, start from the consumer. And so if you're thinking about, we always talk about choice, convenience, and control. And the mall being, at least for me, it's 20 minutes away. It is a big facility, but for most people, it's not on their way home. And so when you think about something like our access point network, where you can pick up the package that would be maybe less than a mile away for a pickup of that type of solution, as opposed to driving the 20 minutes to get to the mall and then parking, going into the mall. Like it's just not as convenient as it's one of those, at least from my point of view, it's an idea that makes sense at the highest level when you're thinking about it. And then you start digging down into like, what does this actually look like? And a lot of it falls apart, I think, similar to how Brian described it there.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're opening up an Amazon distribution center in Pilsen, if I'm not mistaken. And they just, I think, announced that or is going through a zoning approval right now. I mean, I think we're going to see a lot more of that, in the city of Chicago and in other urban centers.
Yeah, and I would call Amazon a notable exception of, and you said earlier that someone said like the Amazons of the world, and I think they're more as opposed to being like, there's not a lot of them, there's the one exception. And I think that like that's a good example where, because they have kind of that Amazon Flex option that they could do the delivery from that point, and maybe have some more extensions of having the demand combined with some of those logistics capabilities, where that's an option. It's harder to think as you step down from Amazon, what other companies would fill that void and have enough, demand and need to use that full infrastructure. And then let alone, like you said, like those mall operators or the real estate companies that are owning those to cut the, from a retail place to a fulfillment place as far as dollars per square foot.
I will say that automation.
Thinking about as well.
I'm sorry.
Sorry to Brian, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I didn't realize you were.
No, you'd asked about automation earlier, and it reminded me of something that we haven't talked about yet, which is for 3PLs that focus on fulfillment. We do some fulfillment, but it's not our core, but we're seeing it more now. And it's that with automation, with robotics, it used to be 100 years ago, warehouses were multi-story. And you still see some of these today, which are pretty incredible to actually look at. They're highly inefficient, these 100-year-old warehouses, but they're so cool to be in. But now you're starting to see that trend again. It's because with automation, with robotics, you can actually make a 5-story warehouse now work just as efficiently as a 1-story warehouse that is, 5, 6, shelves high. So that creates opportunity also in urban centers, and not Manhattan necessarily, but places like I said, Bronx, Brooklyn, suburban Boston, where there is not a lot of land, because that's the biggest restriction. But now you don't need a lot of land anymore. Now you can actually build up like you used to be able to do, 100 years ago. So that is going to be, I think, a trend that's going to accelerate. And it's going to help facilitate more of the, getting close to consumers. And those 3PLs are going to be the ones that can, like Nate, the the warehouse SaaS solution that you talked about. And I can imagine you guys are probably going to be opening up potentially more of these in the future, and maybe one day it'll be a 10-story one, right? Like it'll be like a warehouse high rise, and the same with uses. And I could see the same thing. So we'll see if they get 10 stories high. I think the highest one is maybe four or 5 stories right now, but I think you'll see more of that as well.
Thank you. Susan, is there anything you care to
I think
on the abandoned mall issue?
No, I think they covered it. Just as my own as a shipper and a recipient of packages, I don't want to go to the mall. I want to go. I want to go somewhere where I get out of my car and I'm 3 steps from the door, and there's nobody else in line or a few people in line, and I grab it and it's on my way home and I'm done. So yeah, I agree. It's these retail partners, these alliances that Nate and team have, and we have that fulfill that need for us.
Mm-hmm.
So one question. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry. So I was going to put a follow-up question based on something that Brian said. I think many of the retailers have seen the challenge with kind of deliver from store. Just the pick is so expensive. And so I know, for example, Tesco in the UK created what they call dark stores. They were just really mini warehouses, which were put in urban areas with the goal of really fulfilling online orders, either for pickup or for home delivery. That was the notion. Are any of you, so it's maybe not malls, but this provide small warehousing space, which is in urban areas, which can get stocked with product for pickup or delivery? Are you seeing any demand from that from any of your customers? Do you have any plans?
So I could just talk to that. Oh, go ahead, Susan. I feel like I've talked too much.
No, that's okay. I was just going to say, we're using some of our existing facilities for inventory storage for customers, and they can get it on demand, either delivered or picked up. But in the norm, we're not doing that right now. Just the standalone small warehouses. We're trying to use our existing facilities for that.
FedEx had been doing this for many years, right? Particularly for spare parts and things like that, right?
Yes.
One of our biggest ones in Chicago, actually. Sorry, Nate, go ahead.
I was just going to say similarly, like spare parts is one thing. I think inventory placement for retail sales is a much more complex detail. Like in the spare parts logistic network, it may be, I know that I've signed this specific contract with this specific IT carrier that has to have this part that would make their data center up and running. And they know, like, we've signed those service levels. When you're thinking about retail, once you get within the 1-day service area for that, in most cases, we're still meeting the consumer need of getting that package quickly. And so the extreme complexity that would come with commingling multiple retailers and trying to bring that in that close to the facility has not necessarily met the consumer. We haven't necessarily seen the consumer need enough for 2-hour delivery or an hour delivery that would support. And the complexity of making that all work is difficult. And so I talked a little bit about where to go, where we're, that on-demand fulfillment company that we started. We're still more regional of get it within the 1-day footprint or the 2-day footprint of most of America. This is another case where Amazon maybe is a different animal, and they are able to do inventory closer because of the demand side of things. But taking multiple small businesses or even large businesses and getting their inventory and putting it into a dark store in an urban area, as far as the consumer side of things, the 1-day or 2-day we've seen at least is enough to meet that need, and it doesn't need to be an hour. And if it was an hour, how could we guarantee that specific SKU would be in the right place at the right time? So it would be a massive coordination effort between the small businesses and us to get the goods into the right place. And I'm thinking like the types of goods that you would need in maybe an hour would be maybe the types of good that you could get in like if you're going camping this weekend, you could get that in a local sporting goods store, and you could use that instead of putting it into a dark store still. And maybe that'll change, but right now, I would say if the consumer is looking for that speed to inventory delivery, for like their fishing trip or whatever, you can still go to the big five or whatever sporting goods store is close enough that you can pick it up that day or get it delivered the next day.
Thank you. So we're getting to the time where we need to be wrapping up. I wanted to just do a very quick round here and ask if you have any closing thoughts for us about what's happening in e-commerce, whether what we will continue to see more of the same, just bigger and better, or is there any sort of surprise, something really different on the horizon that we may be looking forward to? Sunil, you want to start?
No, I think the panel really, covered it extremely well. I think there is a lot of growth overall. In particular, if I were to look at things, I would say this separation of large and small is important. And the firms the panelists represent, I think, bring a tremendous amount of value on the small side. I think on the large side, insourcing of different activities will continue to increase because in some sense that's something they can do, and you will also begin to see a bit more of this separation. So rather than just talk about the Amazons of the world, I think the brick and mortar players have realized that they have something to offer that Amazon cannot easily replicate. Just to take an example, Walmart can, with pickup at store, serve a rural area with every product that is sitting at walmart.com at a cost structure which is very difficult for anybody else to replicate today. So I think it's very interesting because you see this separation of the industry where each is serving the market where it adds the most value.
And by the way, Raymond Hall, this answers your question. So thank you, Sunil. Nate, you want to?
I would just say, I think in the future, we're going to see people do what they're good at. And hopefully the people who don't focus on what they're good at and narrowly execute on that are going to not be long for this world, I guess. Because, if you're trying to be a low cost player, you better have that footprint of the retail stores, or you better have the demand to be able to justify that. If you're selling unique goods, make them unique, make them custom, like do the thing that like matches the business model that you have created. One of the big benefits of e-commerce obviously is you can get that extremely long tail of goods and get it to a consumer and not have it be only through the big box. And so we see the small, medium businesses that are doing best are those that have, unique products, and that's going to continue. If you can create a unique product and that's your value proposition, that's great. The larger people who are competing may have a cost focus and maybe the more use SKUs, and we'll probably see a continued spread of the uniqueness compared with the cost players. And I don't really see that changing anytime soon. I feel like there will continue to be the unique players and the cost players, and really people will have to, figure out how to be found. But that's kind of the thing that I see going forward.
You, Brian?
Yeah, I think that, parcel lockers are going to be, big and bigger than I think we think in the future. When we talk about just mobility, flexibility, but one thing that we're seeing is sustainability, where, I'm starting to see more electric vehicles downtown Chicago, from I think both Susan and Nate's companies. We're seeing more requests from retailers and brands asking us about sustainability. I think nobody cared at all about sustainability back in April, May, and June of this year, myself included. But I do think now, now that we've gone through and we've all lived through, and we're still living through what is a worst case scenario right now. I think a lot of people are rethinking things like sustainability and what it means to them, and how to prevent another worst case scenario, whatever that may be. And so we're seeing an uptick, a significant uptick in in asking questions around electric vehicles, around carbon offsets and carbon emissions, and the pace at which we've never seen before. And I don't know if that's just people catching up now, or looking at other providers and partners, and or if this is going to increase in importance and priority as people continue to evolve and develop their supply chain ecosystems. But I have a feeling it's going to play an outsized role, more so than it did pre-COVID. And we're not going back to normal. That ship sailed. Just like today, you go to O'Hare, you go to Midway, you go to whatever airport, you still can't pick up your family or friends at the gate, right? And it's been almost 20 years later. I think the same thing is going to happen with e-commerce. We don't go back to that time. We all better get used to what this new normal is, but it's also a great opportunity for companies that can adapt and evolve.
Thank you, Brian. Susan, last word to you.
Just to reiterate, I mean, the shopping trends that we're seeing right now are going to be the mainstays of the new digital economy. So this was kind of like the warm up. It was fast and furious, and so now we're really warm. And I think as we go forward and things start to become the new norm, we're going to see organizations like we all three represent, that as we service the small business, the medium business, and even the bigger businesses, that we're going to be able to do it better than we've ever done before, because we've learned so much in a short period of time. And just necessity is the mother of invention, is it not? And necessity has driven us to places much quicker than we ever thought we would be. So I think the future is very bright once we get through this dark period of the virus.
Well, thank you all very much for your time today, for this very insightful discussion, and for, again, being candid and very informative and helpful. Sunil, Nate, Brian, Susan, and Brett for monitoring as well the questions for us today. Thank you, and we hope to again be in touch with you all at some point in the near future. Bye-bye. Thank you. And to our audience, thank you very much for joining us today. Please join me with a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you.
Thanks.
Right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hi, guys.